Hey everybody out there, and welcome back to another episode of Spin-Off Sideshow, the Just Add Monsters show, dedicated to exploring all the weird and wild paths you never knew existed from some of the biggest series around. And today, we're looking at something very special in celebration of Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War's release, the handheld Call of Duty games. But more specifically, the Nintendo DS Call of Duty games. Ah yes, Call of Duty, the first-person shooter series that started in oh god, all the way back in 2003, and single-handedly turned the house of Bobby Kotick into one of the biggest game publishers around. The series has seen annual releases since 2005, which I don't even want to count off because I'm afraid it might make me wither into dust. But alongside those mainstream multiplayer blockbuster console releases, did you know that there was a healthy amount of handheld Call of Duty games? Like I said before, this video is going to be mostly focusing on the Nintendo DS Call of Duty series, but there were a couple different spin-offs to the series on mobile platforms before that. But for obvious reasons, we aren't going to be really playing or looking at them. The first one was on the N-Gage, and it looks like this. And then the other one was on the Windows PC phone, and it looked like this. The most competent of these handheld spin-offs was the third one, Call of Duty Roads to Victory, a World War II flavored entry by Amaze Entertainment, which was ported to the PSP and released alongside Call of Duty 3. But ultimately, it doesn't really do anything to set itself apart from the glut of World War II first-person shooters of the era, including the other Medal of Honor PSP games, so it's mostly worth not talking about. So with all that garbage out of the way, let's get down to the main event. First, let me set the scene a little bit. The year is 2007, your Activision, one of the biggest publishers, banking on Call of Duty 4, which is set to be the next biggest thing in online multiplayer gaming and cinematic first-person shooting campaigns. As a company, you're still riding high on the success of series like Guitar Hero and Tony Hawk and their multiple handheld spin-offs. So, what do we do with the new Call of Duty entry? Do we give it to a talented developer and put it on the Sony PlayStation Portable, the more powerful handheld of the two systems on the market, or do we shoehorn it onto the Nintendo DS? I mean, come on, this is Activision we're talking about, so of course we're shoehorning it onto the Nintendo DS. Now, if you'll remember, way back in the day, the Nintendo DS used to be an absolute graveyard of garbage shovelware. From licensed games to children's games to spin-offs of major series that developers just clearly didn't put any time or effort into, the Nintendo DS was an absolute wasteland. So, you'd obviously expect a port of one of the biggest, most explosive first-person shooters ported down to a system roughly with the capabilities of a PlayStation 1, where you'd have to aim using a stylus on a touchscreen to be absolute broken garbage, right? Well, you're wrong. It's actually pretty darn good, thanks to the developers, the maestros, the masters behind the series, N-Space. Starting off in 2007 with an adaptation of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, N-Space would shepherd the series on the handheld through 5 iterations of the game, ending in 2011 with Modern Warfare 3 Defiance. N-Space had previously cut their teeth on EA's 007 GoldenEye Rogue Agent, another first-person shooter on the platform, so they were experienced enough with the format and 3D on the system, which is why you didn't get bad RTSs or minigame collections as Call of Duty games, but instead got full-fledged first-person shooter campaigns. Each game even has a multiplayer suite. It truly can't be overstated how impressive these games are, even today, especially given what the platform was capable of. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a look at how well they adapted Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. The game starts off with a very basic tutorial sequence that, like the main game, sees you going through a number of ranges where drill sergeants yell at you to try out certain weapons and abilities. This gets you familiar with the control scheme, which is actually pretty unique for the Nintendo DS. If you've never played one of these games, basically you either played with your left or right hand on the buttons, which you are able to fire with, and you use the stylus for aiming around. So it was a little awkward and you kind of had to hold your hand in a claw formation to play it properly, but it actually works pretty well. You're able to select and pick up weapons with the touchscreen and aim down sights by double tapping, which in my book was the easiest way to do it, but I definitely understand why they would change it in later iterations. From the off, you can definitely tell they're trying to pack a lot of production value into a very small system. You got fully voiced cutscenes and characters, plenty of ambient sound effects, and a nice variety of assets on display, even if everything is characteristically low poly and pretty blocky even by the Nintendo DS's standards. Also, don't worry about it being in Spanish. The only ROM I could find was in Spanish.
Ve al puesto de activación para cerrar los explosivos.
And just when you get comfortable with the tutorial sequence, the game immediately thrusts you into an assault on your base where you have to fend off enemies attacking you. It immediately becomes clear here that it's not exactly a one-for-one recreation of modern warfare. In fact, this game is kind of a B-story to the original game, which would become a trend in most of N-Space's installments to the series. It usually solves the problem of needing the game to take place in the same world, but not being able to actually have those characters in the console ports for narrative-related reasons. So, kind of like most movie tie-ins, the main characters are just off screen somewhere doing the important stuff, and you get to either clean up after them or you're helping in some vague and nondescript way. But this does mean that you get to see a lot of what was available in the main game, including an AC-130 mission later on, assaulting a cargo ship for a nuclear manifest, and fighting in the dusty streets of a very nondescript Middle Eastern country. And of course, because it's the Nintendo DS, they also pack in a couple touchscreen minigames, which are not very hard at all and begin to feel pretty gimmicky after the first couple times you do a pipe dream section to wire a bomb or whatever. Also, this. While the game goes pretty far to get a lot of the aesthetics right, you can obviously tell that some corners were cut in the presentation to either make it fit on the cartridge, or they just couldn't figure it out before the game launched. For example, none of the weapons have a dedicated reload animation. The gun will just fall off the screen and then come back into frame reloaded. The main campaign doesn't have any kind of intel or collectibles like the original game, so you don't really have any reason to replay missions outside of playing them on a harder difficulty. Enemies are also pretty dumb, which shouldn't be surprising, even though it is impressive the amount of enemies they can fit on screen at any one time. There's also a fairly limited selection of weapons, which will see you mostly using AK-47s and occasionally sniper rifles throughout the campaign. And speaking of the weapons, whoa, were these made out of Legos? Look at these things. I also have some other minor critiques about the main campaign and the gameplay, including that the ADS feels like it goes way too far down the scope, which just seems to obscure your entire vision instead of playing more like a traditional Call of Duty aim-down sight system. And they also rely really heavily on these turret sequences, which, while pretty impressive for the time, technically get stale pretty quick. They also try their hand at emulating a night vision sequence, you know, like in Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. You remember the night vision sequence? Well, here it's actually just assets all tinted bright green. You can tell because the gun effects on the walls are still colored normally. So the entire experience just feels a little off from what you might expect, but altogether this plays as a mostly faithful demake of the Call of Duty gameplay of the time. You even have grenades that you can cook and throw at enemies. Given the limitations of the system, it's a very impressive start to a franchise, and N-Space would certainly not rest on their laurels. Nearly every game in the series would improve on the formula in some way or another, starting with Call of Duty World at War in 2008. Kicking the Call of Duty series all the way back to World War II, you're enlisted into the Army and sent into a way too long tutorial section, where, upon learning the ins and outs of exactly 4 weapons, you're certified and sent off to war to die for your country. Seriously, this section at the beginning is so annoying. You have to run from one place to another, and the game takes its time in walking you through the basics of every single weapon. Assault rifles, pistols, sniper rifles, heavy machine guns, grenades. I just want to kill some Nazis! From the very beginning, you can tell that they've significantly upped the production values here. You have some slightly better voice acting, you have some nicer looking character models, though what will become a trend in the series is that there aren't very many character models in any given game. So, right after you get certified, you and your band of identical brothers all set off to the Pacific to take in the best possible jungles that could be rendered with the glorious power of the Nintendo DS. The first thing I noticed was that they did fix some of my complaints about the first game. The weapons are a lot more detailed, and aiming down sights feels a lot more like a traditional Call of Duty game instead of zooming all the way in like a microscope. Other than those minor changes, the gameplay is largely the same, with you running from area to area, linearly shooting enemies that pop out like a historically inaccurate version of whack-a-mole. Much like Call of Duty 4, we're still working on the Nintendo DS, so it doesn't do much in the way of story or narrative. And this isn't helped by the fact that if you've played one World War II era first-person shooter, you've probably played them all. Oh no, don't go, oh no. Not him. whoever he was. Another complaint I have about the game is its minigames. Much like Call of Duty 4, yeah, they do use the touchscreen for a lot of things, including one of the absolute worst touchscreen minigames I've ever seen in a game, a nonsense telegraphing minigame where you have to hail command for support. And it's like the devs knew how bad this was because the game just automatically lets another team complete it if you fail it 5 times or more. Seriously, I actually technically should have beaten this multiple times, but it just wouldn't give it to me for some reason, and the counting is so off on where you're actually supposed to hit the notes. But I do enjoy the mental image of the telegraph operators who received my rambling nonsense. Right after this sequence, though, the action kicks up a notch when your commanding officer tells you to go get that flamethrower. So suddenly, war crimes. Another aspect that's worth showing off about World at War is that it has a drastically expanded range of weapons, including some favorites at the time, like the MP44, the Thompson, and the M1 Garand. So if you like your World War II weapons, this game's got you set. But honestly, I just didn't have that much fun with this game. I think the level design is a lot more plotting. Some of the sections are really unforgiving, like this one section where you're in a boat having to stave off Japanese Zero planes, where some will shoot at you, some seemingly won't, and some are super accurate and will kill you if you don't get to them quick enough. And some pretty frustrating mines that are set in sections where you feel like you are finally able to run from place to place. It all gives the game a kind of slower feel, and I see that they might have been going for a more paranoid, tense setting like the console releases, but I just don't think it works, and I feel like they should have stuck to the arcadey shooting of the original. The mine sequences especially are minigames that last way too long and pop up way too frequently for my taste. So if you're going to go revisit this game, maybe put this one at the bottom of the list. Fortunately, N-Space would continue to innovate on their formula with 2009's Modern Warfare Mobilized. Now, you'll notice that this isn't Modern Warfare 2, Mobilized, because this game really has nothing to do with Modern Warfare 2, and in fact, kind of seems more like a side story to the events of Modern Warfare 1. It opens with a very goofy news sequence that does its best to dance around anything resembling politics, talking about the kingdom and fighters invading. And then it forces you into the shoes of some US and SAS agents on the run trying to stop a nuclear warhead from falling into the hands of bad people. It's all very boilerplate stuff. And again, the story isn't really going to blow your socks off here. It doesn't really have any memorable characters. And even if it did, I mean, would you be able to tell them apart? But largely, this plays like an improved version of Call of Duty 4 with some of the aforementioned improvements of World at War, like more detailed weapons and a greater weapon variety. It also helps that there's a lot greater variety to the environments and the mission structures, which is apparent from the very beginning. In the first couple levels, you visit South American jungles, snowy factories, and ruined cities. Also commendable is the way Mobilized will mix up its gameplay. There's plenty of settings like a UAV searching overhead through a city for nuclear signatures, and even an awesome sequence where you transfer back and forth between boots-on-the-ground first-person gameplay and controlling a bomb-sensing robot trying to sneak through stealthy areas. It can be a little frustrating because it's the most basic stealth you've ever seen, but it's still very impressive and shows just how committed N-Space was to pushing the system to its absolute limit. I'm going to be honest, I had this game when I was a kid, and I absolutely love it. And even going back to it today, though it is the most simplistic kind of shooter, it's still really fun. Even as a curiosity and as a fan of low-poly games. I totally recommend this one, and it's still worth playing even today. Oh, I will say, though, they did improve some of the enemy death animations, including this one that they roll over and go to sleep. There seems to be only one enemy death sound, which I do remember back in the day, but also, why? But you know what game has more than one enemy death sound? That's right, Call of Duty Black Ops, released the following year in 2010, and boy howdy, from the main menu screen you can tell that they've completely upped their game. You've got challenge modes, which were apparent in the last couple games, but also a zombies mode, which has 4 maps and does a decent job of fitting the zombies experience onto the Nintendo DS, but it's not really worth playing. If I can be honest for a minute, I've played a lot of Call of Duty games in my day, and Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops are probably my favorite campaigns and stories. While I was somewhat disappointed that Modern Warfare Mobilized didn't really touch on the events of Modern Warfare 2, this game was marketed as something of a spin-off to the Black Ops story, so let's see how does it adapt the nuanced, dark, pulpy undertones of this 60s era conspiracy. Barely. In fact, it barely touches on it. You play as a character who got captured alongside Mason at the beginning of Black Ops, who was, never mentioned in the main game, and you gotta go shoot stuff and stop a chemical weapons attack from Russia. So, much like Call of Duty 4 in previous games, you are going to be treading similar ground to the console releases, but it's just different enough that you can claim that your character's helping the good guys along, even if I'm pretty sure they don't even know who your character is. They did their best to adapt the darker, grittier style of Call of Duty Black Ops onto a Nintendo DS, and while it's, still a T-rated shooter on a mostly family-friendly platform, it does a good job of bringing those dingy environments to life with some pretty honestly impressive lighting effects. I forgot to mention this a while ago, but they've long since added plenty of unique reload animations to weapons, and Black Ops is where a lot of those reload animations really shine with how smooth and detailed they can be. I kept reloading some weapons just to see them click again and again. There are also some general gameplay improvements, including some, improved enemy AI who can dash from cover to cover and seem to pop out more often, but honestly, they're still not the brightest peaches in the can. And you can also shoot through thin layers of cover, which is a long time coming for the series, but still, again, impressive that they even managed to pull this off on this tiny little system. The game also introduces weapon recoil for the first time, which does make it feel closer to its console peers, but on the tiny DS screen is a little bit needlessly difficult. Honestly, I had a hard enough time tracking enemies with those tiny reticles as it was. I don't think it really needed to be harder, but the attention to detail is admirable and appreciated. Of course, this would lead into the final game of the Nintendo DS Call of Duty series, Modern Warfare 3 Defiance, a game I've not played until just recently, and honestly, this game friggin' rules. Like, unironically, it's a perfectly competent shooter and probably the best shooter on the Nintendo DS, even if, it's not exactly up against a lot of competition in that category. It even has the most interesting setting out of the bunch, taking a couple pages from Modern Warfare 2 and setting it around a bunch of National Guard and Army characters fighting off a Russian invasion through small suburbs and tiny Alaskan towns while trying to protect vital points of American infrastructure like the Alaskan Pipeline or the Hoover Dam. Again, the characters aren't anything to write home about, but I will note that the dialogue is a lot more flavorful and actually manages to capture some of the quippy tone that you'll hear between characters in a console Call of Duty game. Characters will share little in-jokes and make little jabs at each other in a way that's a lot more dynamic and interesting. The environments are also hugely opened up, with some that actually take a little bit of time to cross. The environments are in fact so big that the minimap sometimes doesn't even pick up enemies that are shooting at you because they're so far away. But honestly, it's hard to be mad about this little gameplay foible when the draw distance and everything going on is so impressive here. The level design kicks the creativity up a notch. Instead of just rolling through the same ruins or jungles or snowy mountaintops, you can find yourself fighting through dilapidated suburbs, shooting enemies through fences and fending off attacks, using remote control explosives. And God bless their heart, Modern Warfare 3 on the DS tries to do slow motion breaching, but kind of similarly to Call of Duty 4 with its night vision effect, you can tell that they just slowed down the frame rate a bit. But golly gee, you just gotta salute them, because look, they tried so hard. The game also takes some other influence from previous Call of Duty console games, including a specific mission in Black Ops where you're alternating between UAV Overwatch and boots on the ground fighting, which, in Modern Warfare 3 on the DS, you're mostly just pointing and clicking where people need to go and then switching to first person. But again, it's an impressive attention to detail nonetheless. It's fascinating that this team was learning not just from one team who were making Call of Duty console games, but from all the teams. The weapon detail and selection is the best it's ever been, with some weapons even having attachments. You can pick up an AK-47 and also use the grenade launcher. There are weapon caches all over the place, like in Modern Warfare 2. And the cover system and aiming are smoother than they've ever been, on top of there being more death animations for enemies than ever. This is really just an incredible package to look back on, especially when you look at the other first-person offerings, let alone 3D action game offerings on the system. The fact that N-Space were able to iterate over 5 years and 5 versions of this game from a fairly okay facsimile to what genuinely at times manages to feel like a pared down, of course, demake of a console experience. Though I will say that throughout every game, enemies still fall over with all the weight of a marionette on sleeping pills once they're dead. The gameplay at its core is still satisfying enough. It's just a bummer that there's no real way to play these games on anything but a DS or a 3DS. But they're still fascinating to go back to as a time capsule of what was possible when publishers and developers themselves really put in the extra mile on underpowered systems. You just don't see them made like this anymore. Unfortunately, and we probably won't, because as of 2016, N-Space is defunct. Now, why could that be? After 5 presumably good-selling games, you would think that Activision would continue the Call of Duty series on the more powerful Nintendo 3DS. I mean, why wouldn't they? Because I don't know. And I guess that brings it to the end, where Modern Warfare 3 Defiance was the last handheld game ever to grace the Call of Duty name. Okay, goodbye. Okay, let's talk about Black Ops 2 Declassified. So the PlayStation Vita came out, and all across 2012, Sony said, let's get our biggest names and franchises on here, but make them not quite as good. You had Assassin's Creed, Resistance, Uncharted, and a couple others, all of which kind of failed to capture the majesty and glory of the traditional console versions. But there was one golden light at the end of a tunnel, an exclusive deal made with Activision for the new Call of Duty game to have a spin-off exclusively for the PlayStation Vita. And unfortunately, it is far and away the absolute worst game to bear the Call of Duty name. I'm not even kidding. While I don't currently own a copy of this game because I have played it. I've played it all the way through, and it took me less than an hour to beat the entire campaign start to finish. And it's not even worth playing. It's not even Black Ops 2 in the traditional sense. It's more of a spin-off to the first Black Ops, where you play as a bunch of non-connected, segmented missions as characters technically from the original Black Ops game, with totally different voice actors and reused assets. And no, it wasn't developed by N-Space, who had spent 5 years cutting their teeth on a franchise. It was developed by Nihilistic Software, and honestly, I can't be too hard on the devs on this one, because from all accounts, it seems like they had between 4 and 5 months to make a game for a brand new system and one of the biggest publishers and series in the world. So it's hard not to feel a little bit bad for them, especially after the critical shellacking they were left with. As of reporting, Nihilistic Software is unfortunately also defunct. So thanks, Activision. Good job on that one. Which is a somewhat dour note to end the series on. While the Nintendo Switch has mostly caught up to modern consoles, or at least modern console capabilities when it comes to processing, there hasn't been any Call of Duty games on handheld systems since 2012. There have been various attempts at Call of Duty-like games on mobile, including the most recently, obviously titled Call of Duty Mobile, which seems to be doing pretty okay, and seeing as how it's something Activision can easily monetize, will probably be the series' future in any pocket-based capacity forever, as far as I can see. But it's still fun to reflect on what was and what might have been had N-Space continued on their brave journey of squeezing as much power out of underrated handhelds as possible. The things that they managed to portray and capture on such a tiny, diminutive screen, especially in the face of all the other half-assed attempts out there at recreating the glory of console games on a handheld system, you gotta give it to them. N-Space may be gone, but their legacy definitely shouldn't be forgotten.